Well, everyone, this is going to be some interesting discourse, and I ask that you guys don't jump to immediately make an opinion on this right out of the gate, because I've looked into this, and I had my first immediate reaction, my immediate take, but then upon hearing the arguments from both ends of things a little deeper, I found myself switching which side I found myself agreeing more with. And you might find yourself go through a similar experience when you hear about this discourse. So, this basically hinges around a streamer and YouTuber named Alanah Pearce. She goes by Chalanazard, like Charizard, but with Alanah for Alanah Pearce in there. It's difficult. One of my OG YouTube crushes. She is also pretty celebrated in the game community. She actually worked on God of War Ragnarok, and I think God of War 2018 as well, the PS4, PS5 generation of God of War games, and her work in the game industry goes back a long way, right? And she does some pretty good content. I watch her stuff. It's pretty good. And over the last couple days, she has been embroiled in controversy over a video she made 4 days ago. It's her second most recent video. Elden Ring DLC is, quote, too hard, parentheses, it's not. And in that video, she talks less so about the discussion of whether or not it is okay or good for a game to be hard, and more so about how we can still have hard games, but provide accessibility options that still let the experience be enjoyed by people with disabilities. Because this is, of course, a big part of game design and game development, is trying to make your game accessible to a lot of people, even if they have some form of disability. And in the video, she lists a number of things that may be considered a disability that can get in the way of playing a game. And one of the main core things that she was criticizing for Elden Ring is the fact that despite it not being a heavily online-focused game, like, there's multiplayer, don't get me wrong, but it's no MMO, right? Because it's an online game, though, it's built in with the system of not being able to pause it. Like, you can't pause Elden Ring. If you're, like, mid-fight and then all of a sudden you feel like you're about to vomit up, like, your guts and organs, you pretty much just gotta put down the controller and accept that that attempt is fucked, even if there was, like, a pixel of health left. You don't get to pause the game and get up and do something. You know, like, no matter how urgent it is, you have to sacrifice that life, that attempt, right? And, obviously, it's just a video game, and if you have to get up, like, mid-fight to do something, that's probably more important than the video game, so who cares? But at the same time, if you're a game designer, and your job is to focus on making games accessible, that is the kind of thing you want to discuss, like, mitigating that sort of disability. And one of the things that she lists are, well, a bunch of disabilities that make sense, that involve, you know, not being able to sit for a long time in front of a game that cannot be paused, right? Sometimes some disabilities require you to get up and do something very quickly, right? Like, I don't know, if someone has, like, IBS, they probably have to run to the bathroom pretty frequently, that kind of thing. And so one of the things she lists is being a new parent, like having a kid, as being a form of disability. Because you might be halfway through an Elden Ring boss fight, and all of a sudden your baby is crying because it needs its diaper changed. And people got mad. Really fucking mad. Because, well, for one, she's a woman on the internet, so she's not allowed to have an opinion that's in anyone's... Like, if someone thinks she has a wrong opinion, she has to get giga super nuked off the internet because she's a woman. You know, there's a much lower bar for, like, getting a shitload of harassment online for women compared to men when it comes to having a platform. But then on top of that, a lot of these people just kind of, like, filled in blanks where there aren't any. That is a bad take. That's what I thought at first, too. But I think you might find yourself flipping around on this. Now, she's probably going to explain this in more detail here, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the breakdown. A fair few people pointed out on Twitter, and they've gotten a good bit more attention now, thankfully, is that the term she used wasn't actually disability. The term she used was being a new parent is a situational disability. She used the term situational disability, which is actually broadly accepted in the realm of psychology, medicine, and the gaming industry and the entertainment industry. Situational disability can be anything. It doesn't have to be like a permanent actual disability. It just means there is something that is going to impede that type of player situationally, because a thing might come up that'll keep them from being able to play the game. And so the term for things that force a gamer to get up and walk away frequently in like game development, they refer to it as a situational disability. And that is how they tailor like accessibility options around it. They've got words for these things, and she used that word, and people interpreted it as her saying that being a parent is a disability. Like, obviously, she did not mean this rudely. Now, she has been inundated in harassment, obviously, but she's put out a video, and it's called Let Me Explain Situational Disabilities and Accessibility Design. This is literally just her arguing in favor of accessibility design in games.
Allow me to explain. Hello, everyone.
Basically, the people who I presume that should generally agree with her took what she said incorrectly, like very, very wrong, and used it to justify what is essentially a harassment campaign. It's pretty fucked. It's pretty fucked.
If you don't know me, I'm Alanah, and I work 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. at a AAA game studio. I am a writer on the design team, but I also work as an accessibility consultant, and I've done that on 7 separate games so far. I'm credited as an accessibility consultant on God of War Ragnarok because that is the most work that I did on that game was in the accessibility space. And I also created my own awards show called the Video Game Accessibility Awards. We've run that for 2 years. I took a break last year because God of War Ragnarok came out.
Yeah, she's really big on the accessibility thing, which is huge, right? Like, I love video games, and I've thought sometimes, like, man, what if I, like, chopped a finger off? Like, what if something happened and I lost a finger or an eye or my hearing or something along those lines? Something that, like, impacts one of my favorite hobbies, which is gaming. Like, to the extent where it's substantially harder to do and enjoy from then on out. Like, I think about that, like, long and hard and what that would be like, and it genuinely fills me with, like, stress, you know? Like, it actually makes me, like, upset, and I feel like, man, fuck, that is not good, you know? Like, I don't want to be in that position. We clearly don't have enough, like, accessibility options for gamers. When I imagine what it would be like to be a disabled gamer, I'm like, fuck, that would not be good, you know? On top of that, something that gave me a lot more appreciation for accessibility options is one of my best friends, Ethan, being colorblind. He's got heterochromia with a tritanomaly, I believe is what it is, meaning he can mostly just see blue and purple. He can see a bit of purple. He can see a lot of blue. He can't see green or red and distinguish them. They appear as like piss yellow, from my understanding, kind of like a dim piss yellow. He's colorblind as fuck, meaning that a lot of things that are color-coded in games do not heterochromia. My bad. It's tritanomaly is the last bit. I'm trying to remember the exact type of colorblindness he has, but I always fuck it up. It's like protanopia with a tritanomaly. I think it's protanopia with a tritanomaly is specifically the very specific color blindness he has. It's not important. My point being, bro can't see a lot of colors or distinguish between a lot of colors. LSD would not fix color blindness. Color doesn't work that way. So essentially, like it actually does end up being a problem. Like, me and him will be playing a game together, and I'll be like, hey, could you grab me that thing? And he'll be like, yeah, where is it? And I said, oh, I left it by the green so-and-so. And he'll be like, which one's the green one? I'm like, fuck. Or like, we're editing a video or making a thumbnail for a video. And I'm like, oh, can you make the text there green? I think it would look really good green. And he's like, I have to tell him which part of the color picker is yellow and which part is green. He's gotten used to it now. He knows just where the colors are now. But before, he would be like, okay, Zan, which one's yellow, which one's green? Like, and he'd switch between like yellow and green, and it's like, he literally can't tell the difference. They're the same color to him, right? And so being friends with someone who has such an overbearing, constantly present disability that, like, I'll forget he has it and talk to him like he doesn't. And then he's like, bro, colorblind. And I'm like, fuck! You know, like, it brought so much more appreciation for accessibility options and stuff. You know, it really is an important issue.
And it would be very weird to have an award show the same year as the game that you worked on accessibility, even though I don't vote on it. It's voted on by a full panel of disabled gamers. But it's a thing that I care a lot about and know a lot about, more than most people, though there are certainly people who like full-time do accessibility in the space who would know way more than I do. But earlier in the week, I made a video that I called Elden Ring is Too Hard, in quotations. And majority of that video, I think it's like the first 8 minutes, I'm just basically talking about the negative reviews that Elden Ring has gotten for being too hard and saying that I disagree with them. Majority of that video is me saying, no, I think...
Elden Ring DLC and Elden Ring in general is not too hard. It's just got the most bullshit of any Souls game in it. If you're like a Souls game player and you say there's no bullshit in any of the games and you should just get good, you're definitely a Souls game newbie. But if you've played since Demon's Souls or Dark Souls 1, you will readily admit there is a lot of bullshit that's just plain unfair in the Souls game. Good example in Dark Souls 1 is Bed of Chaos. The Capra Demon fight is also a little bullshit, but it's doable. Bed of Chaos is nearly RNG. And there are a lot of things throughout the Souls game franchises that push it on the bullshit meter. Like, all right, you kind of cheated your way to difficulty here, FromSoft, you know what I mean? And Elden Ring has the most cheating to be hard. The vibe that I get is that Demon's Souls, look like when I go back and I play Demon's Souls, it's abysmally easy. It's not a challenge. There's zero challenge there. Dark Souls 1, a little harder, but for me, there's zero challenge because I played through it so many times. Like, I can parry with no shield and just switch. I can just double hand a weapon and just switch to one-handed to parry, and then double hand, and then, you know, you use R1 and then just keep going, right? Dark Souls 1, very much not a hard experience, right? There's some bullshit in there, but it's pretty easy. But the escalation to Dark Souls 2 is pretty substantial. Like, there was a pretty significant increase in difficulty to Dark Souls 2. A lot of it comes from the fact that the games fundamentally feel pretty different. But then on top of that, you go to Dark Souls 3, and there's an even, like, a greater, perhaps, increase in difficulty. Dark Souls 3 is fucking hard, but I would argue it is fair hard, right? There's some bullshit, but it's fair. I'd say for the most part, Dark Souls 1 difficulty, real fair. I don't like shields in Dark Souls games. I can parry without one, too, in Dark Souls 1, so why would I use one? Anyway, although I will put Grass Crest Shield on my back just because, you know. Anyway, like, every Dark Souls game, very fairly it felt, like, without much bullshit, was able to have, like, a steady increase in difficulty game after game. So even if you were someone who started with Demon's Souls, played Dark Souls 1 a million times, then played Dark Souls 2 a million times, your first playthrough of Dark Souls 3 was probably still going to be hell. And that was the point. People expect that from the next Souls game, is that no matter how many times they played the previous Souls games, it's going to be super hard getting into the next one, right? There's got to be increasing challenge. The problem is they can either very creatively come up with a shitload of new boss designs that attack and have patterns that are completely different than anything we've encountered before, so you can't use any past skill to carry you through Elden Ring and its DLC, which has this problem worst. But that wouldn't be as hard. That wouldn't have the same amount of difficulty, or it would be a lot of work, right? And it wouldn't even be as hard for a lot of these people. So instead, what it seems like they did with Elden Ring, which is kind of every attempt I've put into Elden Ring, every time I encounter these attacks, I'm just like, ugh. And it just saps my motivation to play the game away, are they take different forms, but when I describe them like this, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. The attacks that are new to the Souls series, they came with Elden Ring, and they're the ones that are completely untelegraphed, instant cast, almost unavoidable, and they almost feel like they're just punishment for being in a certain spot while fighting a boss. There's not really a way to avoid them. They don't wind up. It's just like, the best example is the Golden Knight on the horse, and the horse's sort of shoulder butt it does to you. If you're standing in that spot, it will just hit you with the shoulder butt. There's no avoiding it, right? And the waterfowl dances, like AoE spam, a lot of AoE spam in Elden Ring. I've watched friends play through it, and every time I watch them play it, unlike Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, or any other Souls game gameplay, I'm not like enticed by the difficulty. I genuinely roll my eyes at Elden Ring gameplay and go, this is bullshit. You know, I can tell it's bullshit, and I'm not even playing it. Like, I don't want any part of this, right? Okay, no. All right, to be clear, if you're saying that Elden Ring is easy, it's because you're breaking the game. You're getting yourself gear that breaks the game. When I say Elden Ring is bullshit, I'm assuming you're playing through Elden Ring the way you're supposed to play through Elden Ring, which is nearly naked with double-handing a longsword. With no shield, and you roll through attacks. Like, that's how you play Souls games, right? That's how it's done. That's how it's meant to be played. You don't go fucking katana. You don't use, like, some broken-ass cheap build. You better not be using summons. I'm not going to use, like, summons to play a fucking Souls game, unless there's story summons, which don't exist in Elden Ring as far as I know. I'm not going to have to summon in, Andre, or not Andre, fucking, how am I blanking on his name right now? Solaire. Not going to have to summon in Solaire for story stuff. Everywhere I go, I recommend Jedi Survivor. It's a Souls-like, but scratches an itch that Dark Souls doesn't. I like Jedi Survivor. It's actually really good. Regardless, though, Radahn lets you have 10 NPCs. Jesus Christ. I don't like summons very much unless they progress the story. Dark Souls 1 did summons really well, where, like, you just summon a character, and then they die right away to the boss, so you basically don't have a summon. Or they either die immediately or one-shot the boss for some reason, like Black Iron Tarkus. Or they just die instantly. But once you've beaten the fight, it progresses that character's story. Solaire being the best example.
That you should get good. Like, I did literally say get good in it. The second part of that video, I wanted to talk about something that I'm just going to give with more detail now. About accessibility design, and why when people talk about being against a game being accessible, I think it's really silly, because accessibility is so much broader than just a guy in a wheelchair, which is what most people seem to think of when they think about accessible design. But when it actually comes to that design, it is much, much, much broader than that, and will definitely apply to you at some situation in your life. So in this video, I was talking about that. I was saying when people ask for accessibility in games, they aren't asking for an easy mode, because they also just want to experience the hard game. They're not trying to get it to just be easier. And I was saying, you know, accessibility design is so much bigger than people think it is. An example I used, and to be clear, I wasn't even advocating for this. I didn't say that I think it should be there. It was just an example. An example I gave let me just show you the clip first. Let me show you the full clip. When people are asking for accessibility, I'm not actually asking for an easy mode. That isn't the intent. There are also multiple kinds of disabilities, especially where gaming is concerned. There are long-term disabilities, there are situational disabilities, there are temporary disabilities. It counts as a disability where a video game like Elden Ring is concerned if you have a kid. You have a 2-year-old, you're trying to play Elden Ring, you can't pause. That is a situational disability that you have, where the game not having the option for you to be able to pause, for example, is a hindrance for your particular disability, a situational disability. You may need to pause to stop your kid from putting a fork into a socket. So basically,
it's very easy to write it off. The problem is, and this was what a lot of people online argued, was why are we even having this conversation? It's a video game. Obviously, you should just put down the controller, let your character die. Who cares about your attempt? Go do whatever IRL thing you had to do. In this case, it'd be like, take care of your kid. But why can't we have the conversation about potentially having a feature that allowed you to pause the game so that you could click a button as you put the controller down that would stop the game in its tracks and keep you from losing your progress, so you can get up and do what you need to do and come right back to it and resume where you were, not die, lose your progress, and have to pick back up from the beginning of the fight and make a death run. You know, and she's not even advocating for that feature. It's just like, isn't it a fair conversation to have, right? Like, yeah, there are people in situations where their experience with Elden Ring is very different and harder than someone else's experience with Elden Ring, just because of the situation they're in. It is a situational disability. It is a game design term, and people misunderstood her.
He explained 3 pillars of disability as it pertains to design. I did not invent this term. This term has been around for a long time. There are variations of the term, and it's multiple facets of design. This is used in web design, it is used in app design, it is used in software design, and it is used in game design. Or development. Design or development. Either really works. As it turns out, actually even broader than that. I've learned this week from...
Yeah, I know you can go to the title screen, but unless you've gotten, like... Unless you're, like, a Souls nerd who's really good at navigating the menus quickly, that's not realistic. Like, you've got to open up... I don't know how it works with Elden Ring, but with, like, the Souls games, you've got to open up one menu, click over to the, like, cog icon, click that, then scroll down to Quick Game, and then select Confirm, and then wait for the screen to fade, and that is the point in which the game has technically paused. And I don't know if that even, like, resumes you back into the fight with, like, your progress intact. It might just put you outside the fog door, maybe alive, I don't know. It's just, there's not a pause game, like a pause button realistically. And the argument was specifically having a kid or being in a situation where you have to get up and do something frequently puts you in a situation playing a game like Elden Ring that you can't pause, or any online game that can't be paused. It puts you in a pretty bad situation. So game developers are looking at options that, without detracting from the game's core idea, alleviate these problems. Like, imagine in an MMO, if you've not been in combat for like 5 seconds or something, you can press a button that turns you invisible to everybody and everything, and you become like immortal or something, and it counts as like pausing the game, right? And you can just click that button and it happens. That's just like an idea. I'm sure it would have to be fine-tuned, but like, there are people whose job it is to figure out how to make these games more accessible. She is one of those people. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that she's going to be looking at, right? I'm not saying Elden Ring needs that feature, but, you know, it's a conversation.
People contacting me about it, that situational disability is also considered in, like, commercial buildings. Apparently, it's not even just app development. It is much bigger than that. And there are 3 pillars of design. There is permanent, which is the thing that I think most people think of when they think of the word disabled. Person who has one arm, somebody who is blind. Let me pull this up, literally just give you a direct example. This is from Microsoft Design Toolkit, and I'm sourcing them because they are the company that most of you will know the name of or be familiar with, but you can find examples of this all over the place in this space. So we have permanent on this side, which is, for example, someone has a permanent disability, someone with one arm, someone who is blind, someone who is deaf, or someone who is nonverbal. Then there are temporary disabilities, which is like if you broke your arm, you broke your wrist, you have an ear infection. Then there are situational disabilities. This is example that's used here as new parent, a driver who is distracted, a bartender. I can explain the bartender one because people are confused about that as well, and a heavy accent. People are also reacting to the heavy accent one. So let me explain what the situational disabilities mean here. Maybe an app can't understand your voice because you have a heavy accent. That is considered a situational disability. You are disabled, you are unable, you cannot proceed through whatever software or whatever task you are trying to complete because of something that is situational to you. And it is situational also to...
Like, I really do feel like we're in this weird era where, like, people jump down your throat for saying the word retard because they want a virtue signal about how they're so against ableism, and they're such amazing advocates for, like, people with disabilities. But then there are people who are having actual conversations about, like, normalizing, expanding access to, and just sort of accommodating people with disabilities, a large variety of disabilities, and educating people on, like, the large, like, broad variety of disabilities that exist. And yet, like, the response overwhelmingly from the internet is harassment and hate. It's like, come on. This is a real conversation about these issues, you know? It really be that way sometimes. I really do, like, you guys have to remember, the bar for receiving a harassment brigade online is so much fucking lower if you're a woman. Like, you can be a guy and literally make your living off of just, like, actually eating bugs and shit in the woods, and people will give you less shit than a woman who dared to maybe possibly be wrong to a large audience.
to the context of that game. Like, the situational here means having a heavy accent is not considered a disability in layman's terms. You would not be called disabled all over the world. None of these things are like, if you have a heavy accent, you're disabled. It's not that. It's just the situational disability in terms of design is that you are disabled from using the interface in the way that a user should be able to because of your situational disability. That's the term. The bartender example here is referring to a really loud environment. So if you are somewhere loud, they could also use music festival, but they're just using someone who functionally regularly works in a certain environment. So if they're in a loud environment and they can't hear a particular thing on whatever app, whatever interface that they are trying to use, the accessible design would aim to alleviate that situational disability. It's not saying bartenders are disabled in the way that the public associates the term disabled. I feel like distracted driver is pretty obvious. The new parent one, the example that I used, which again is fairly commonly used, I didn't invent the term, it's been around for a really long time, is if you're a parent, you're trying to play a game like Elden Ring and you are halfway through your boss fight and your kid runs across the floor and does something dangerous, you have to drop the controller and go and get them. That would be considered a situational disability in that situation you are unable to complete the task that you are trying to complete because of something that happened to you situationally. You have been disabled from completing the task. The way this pertains to accessibility isn't to say that all games, all apps, all processes need to alleviate.
By the way, I feel like so many people would have had less of a problem with this take as well. Like, this is actual, like, anti-gamer bias. I feel like many less people would have had a problem with the opinion that being a new parent is a disability if the conversation wasn't about gaming and was instead about work, like working a job. Like, yeah, it should be an accommodating disability by workplaces to consider if you're a new parent. I think a lot less people would have freaked out. I think they would have been like, yeah, no, fair. I think, yeah, having a kid does get in the way of getting your work done and, like, getting to work on time. And, yeah, like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like, no one would have had a problem if the example used was working, like, a job rather than gaming. This is some actual anti-gamer bias.
All of these things. That's not the intent either. Like, it's just a way in which accessible design is much broader than people think it is, in the ways that it can help a lot more people than people think it can. And it's also definitely a reality in accessibility where it is basically impossible, I would argue, to fulfill every accessibility need on the planet. That is very, very, very difficult to do. There are so many of them. The situational ones are so numerous. But it's just a means of looking at design that would allow the people who are doing the accessibility design to think about it as broadly as possible, think of as many situations as possible in which somebody is disabled from completing the task. Somebody is unable to complete the task. Somebody is hindered from completing whatever task they are trying to, whatever function they are trying to complete in whatever software that they are engaging with. I think the word disability is probably really common used in the tech space because we use disabled a lot. Like, a function was disabled. This feature has been disabled. Bluetooth has been disabled. It is no longer able to work, not because it's been turned off or it doesn't exist. It has just been disabled. I think that's probably why it's widely used and not considered to be offensive when it comes to design. And there are also, I've definitely seen people say having kids isn't a disability.
One of my favorite things about the internet is it's always the least educated, most, like, ignorant people who are the most sure they know everything and have the most moral high ground. And they act on it. And so they end up just loudly screaming about how much on a moral high horse they are, and they go on their harassment campaigns on a premise that is completely wrong, you know? Complete Dunning-Kruger on the part of the people that went after her for this, thinking they knew what they were talking about when they really didn't. They were just arguing against accessibility in games.
It's just a responsibility, go do something else. And that's totally valid. Yes, that can make you a shitty parent. The intention is not to allow parents to be shitty parents. The intention is to allow them to not be punished or have a negative consequence in your product because of something like that where possible. And, like, a very good example of, I think, people misunderstanding it as a design ethos and not a thing you have to do is I've seen people say, oh, what, so I'm disabled if I can't pause in a multiplayer game when I need to? No one would ever argue to take away from the design of the game. So, like, if that is the purpose of the game is an online multiplayer experience where you are having interactions with people in real time and that is the core of the game, no one is going to argue that the game fundamentals should ever change. That's not what people are asking for. No one's going to say you need to have a pause menu in an
You're
online
very
game.
late,
Like that
Clear
obviously
X.
is functionally impossible. It is just about thinking about
context.
the most accessible options for the thing that you are making without changing design principles. You would never change design principles. You would still want your core game to function exactly as is. The Last of Us Part 2, again, I think is the most accessible game ever made. They clearly created exactly what they intended to create and then added all the accessibility features to make it an extremely accessible game. And the purpose of sheets like this and information like this, again, is not to say that like your game's not going to be, no one is going to be furious if it doesn't hit every pillar. It's just that there are a lot of pillars. A lot of this comes, of course, from people who actually care about games who have.
I'm gonna be honest, the reason why people get mad at the idea of like Elden Ring having an easy mode is because a lot of gamers are like kind of elitist losers. And despite the fact that if there was an easy mode to Elden Ring, they could just not play it and their experience would be in no way, shape, or form harmed. The fact is, when they push through and beat Elden Ring on that hard mode, they want it to be the only way one could have beat it, and thus so that they can say, oh, I beat Elden Ring. Everyone unanimously knows what that means, and they can sort of use it as a way to gatekeep, like, gamerhood, right? Yeah, the get good stuff. You know, and I participate in it myself, right? I'm a longtime Souls game fan, right? But at the same time, it's explicitly why people say that shit. It's just like loser gamer gatekeeping, and it kind of lets slip how much like the fact that you beat a game matters to your self-worth, which I think is a little cringe. I think it's a little cringe.
Disabilities. I am one of those. It started in a very selfish way. I mentioned it in the video, but I have tendonitis in both my wrists. This means that I can't rapidly button mash. I've had that for like maybe 10 years now. And so I have trouble playing any game that just requires, like if you have a QT, I will always change to press and hold in the accessibility menu rather than tapping, because I will eventually, like my wrist will lock up and I won't be able to do it. That's how I got it.
Yeah. God of War Ragnarok having that was really helpful. I think they had it in 2018 too. I get that as well. It fucks with me in MMOs. Like, it's usually like, I can go into like a hard fight or do a few dungeons and I'm fine. But if I'm like grinding an MMO all day on my day off and I'm like, I don't know, fishing or just like generally questing, if my hands have to be on the keyboard the whole time, eventually like my wrists around here and here, they lock the fuck up and it hurts. And I feel like a sharp pain all the way through here. I get that like carpal tunnel and I just gotta like go for a walk and like take my hands off the keyboard and go like just move around and stuff because it hurts. That shit hurts.
Involved in accessibility, and technically that is considered a permanent disability. I do not call myself disabled because I have that. Like in general terms, I'm not going to say I'm disabled, but I've actually had people who most people would identify as disabled.
Oh, you could not play I've played Minecraft since almost certainly well before you and Snowy Prince.
In the accessibility space, criticize me for that. Like, I've had criticism that is basically, Alanah, you are disabled, and by being afraid to use that word, you are preventing other people from realizing that they also have disabilities. That's a whole thing. But technically, that is considered a permanent disability in so far as it is permanent, it's not going away, and I have trouble playing video games, and so I need accessibility features. That's how I got involved in the space. Now, as I was saying, a lot of this obviously comes from people who have disabilities, who care about disabilities, who actually genuinely care. But I'm also sure that a lot of this comes from the app development and the web development, where they just want to make sure that you will never turn off the thing. Part of it is surely corporations being very time hungry. We call it the time wars here on this channel, or I've spoken many times about right now being in an era where corporations just want as much of your time as possible. So I don't doubt that some of this, when it comes to higher ups, is also coming from the time wars, where, you know, the corporation wants to make sure that you don't have a situational disability that prevents you from engaging with their software, that makes their software frustrating, that makes you want to put down their software in any capacity. It is definitely mostly people who care, in my experience. I don't think I've ever met any of those people, but I don't doubt like that the term probably came from web development or app development, where they were just trying to make sure that you wouldn't have some situation that would disable you from completing the task on their website that they want you to stay.
A really good example of an accessibility option that I think everyone can get behind is having a lot of support for alternative inputs. So like, for example, a big way that I've helped with the wrist thing I mentioned before was that I have a special mouse with a special set of key bindings that allow me to use my mouse buttons as modifier keys. So my whole rotation, like, I'll press like, here, if I show you my mouse, these two buttons right here control my AoE rotation FF14. I just click between these two buttons, and that's my whole AoE rotation. Super simple, super easy. Like, anytime I have, like, a damage buff modifier, it's my R. I standardize everything, and it's in, like, a really good spot, so I don't have to crane my stuff. But being able to set your own key bindings and use, like, alternative input, like, hell, being able to hook up, like, foot pedals and use them for leaning left and right in a game like Tarkov, that's an accessibility option. It's big. It helps. It's good. I like those things.
Now, if people are upset or offended by the term disability or disabled here, I don't think you're ever wrong to be upset by a word or offended by a word. If that's how you feel, then that is how you feel. This has been this way for a long time. It is used in the space all the time. It is used by permanently, visibly disabled people on a regular basis in the accessibility space. But language changes according to societal preferences all the time. So if people were to just be learning about this term this week, which it seems like is the case for a lot of people, and are really offended by the use of disabled or disability in this context, I'm not against changing it. I'm an accessibility consultant, but I'm not on the kind of boards where they make these terms or make these docs. I've just helped on games specifically with the permanent disability side, not the situational disability side. But if you're upset about the term, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong to feel that way. If it made you uncomfortable to hear that kids are considered a situational disability. Again, it's not that kids are, though. It's that the context of which the child appears and does something disables you from completing a task. Whatever. Semantics. But if you would like to...
Yeah, dude, the comments on the original video were fucking insane. Here, I'll bring up the original video, and we can look at the comments. Not all games need to be made for all people. Having a kid is not a disability. It is a responsibility. Also, you can pause the game. Go to equipment, then select help, then select menu explanation. P.S. There is no wrong way to play the game. If you want to play the game without or with summons, it's an option. Okay. I like that. No, you totally can pause the game. You just have to navigate through multiple menus with precision, or you click into the wrong menu and have to click out. In a game where if something happens and you're in a boss fight, you've got like half a second to react to anything. The bosses literally react to you not doing anything with a jab. Like, if you stop to heal, you're going to get yourself jabbed across the fucking arena. Because you're not allowed to stop and heal in Elden Ring fights. Like, how the fuck are you supposed to get... Jesus Christ. Situational disability equals momentary inconvenience. Never used any accessibility features until I crushed my right hand and lost my index finger from that hand. Now I need the accessibility features to play most games. I don't feel like any less of a gamer for needing them. Based. Here's the rub. Not every game is for everyone. I play Tarkov, and my boys do not because they find it too challenging. The point of the game is for it to be difficult. That's why can't we just start being okay with not every game being made for every gamer? See, like, the conversation is going to get dragged in by these, like, elitist types that base their, like, self-worth on being good at a hard game. And so, for one, they would actually lose their mind if Elden Ring had a hard mode, because then when they say they beat Elden Ring, it doesn't mean the same thing it meant before, and it hurts their self-esteem, their like, self-worth. And then on top of that, these are the types of people who legitimately don't like making things accessible. They want to gatekeep, right? Having a child isn't a disability, it's a responsibility. If you see having a kid as a disability, it might be best for both of you if that kid gets sent elsewhere. No child should feel like a burden. So having a kid as a disability, it feels like I've stepped into the world of crazy. When you make a game for everyone, you make a game for no one. There it is. I knew the Philstat quote would be used against accessibility options. I knew, like, that. It's why I really hate that quote, because I like the quote in context, because what they're actually referring to is, like, when you make a game, make it for a tailored specific audience, and it will do well with that audience, and people will come to play it because they see that audience having fun with it, and they want to share that fun. Instead, that quote gets perverted and twisted into don't have accessibility options in games because a game for everyone is a game for no one. The fact this is about having a fucking pause button too, holy shit. Having a kid is not a disability. That's a really stupid thing to say. You can take the journalist out of IGN, but you can't take the IGN out of the journalist. Huh, I wonder what the political leanings are of these people. Kids are not a disability, they're a responsibility. Who do you think said this, like, in a video response to her that, like, they're parroting? Because there's no way that they all came up with that quote originally. They're repeating that from someone, right? Like, that's a copy pasta. Honestly, calling having a kid a situational disability is truly a stretch. A disability is an objective condition, which makes you unable to do certain actions. I don't see how having a kid can be considered that. Notice how they, like, described it as if they were pulling from, like, a definition, like a set definition? Like, it's the very confidently being wrong and having no idea what they're talking about. I also think that calling the skidoo tree fragments optional is wrong, since the balancing of the expansion is all based around them. I wish I had the extension to see the like/dislike ratio, laughing crying emoji. Having a disadvantage doesn't mean having a disability. Having a child who needs attention is a disadvantage. You make it sound like being a parent makes you disabled, and the game does actually have a pause function. Mind you, it's clicking through multiple menus. Also, maybe the child, and logging out of the game, not pausing. Also, maybe the child needs more attention than said parent needs to play video games. At that point, get your priorities straight. These gamers that don't have kids that are probably like 15 being like, why are you playing video games if you have a kid? So yeah. As you can see, this shit is, like, genuinely fucking, like, it's insane. It's actually fucking stupid. And as you can imagine, Souls players, like one of the most elitist fan bases. These aren't even Souls players, they're Elden Ring players. The Souls fan base is based. I don't care for Elden Ring, and I don't care for Elden Ring's fan base. I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't give a fuck about Elden Ring. And Elden Ring players are genuinely like the cancer of the Souls game community. You know what I mean? Anyway. Yeah, that's about what I expected in terms of the response, but as you guys can see, when you try to have conversations about accessibility in games for people with disabilities, or even if people so much as mishear what you meant, they will jump down your throat, and it's made all the worse if you commit the cardinal sin of being a woman on the internet. Now, if you enjoyed this segment, consider dropping a like. It really does help a lot. Every thumbs up really goes a long way to help the channel, and it really does, you know, it basically pushes my content out to new people, and I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to comment down below and subscribe if you haven't already as well. It also helps a lot, and I really do appreciate it. Follow my social medias, linked down below in the description as well, and join my fan Discord, which is the main hub of my fan base. It's totally free to join, and we're hosting an Avatar: The Last Airbender watch party in there after stream today. I've never seen the show before, so we're going to be resuming my blind watch through with Season 2. It's going to be a good time, and I hope to see you all there. Finally, of course, consider supporting me financially by donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or support me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buy some merch to the Streamlabs link down below. But regardless, thank you for watching, and have a good one.